And it's 5
Yeah.
o'clock on the dot. Got it. Okay, I'm going to admit everybody.
Pierre loaned you yesterday. I noticed the faint black and red smudges on it at the time.
So we're going to get started in just a second. People are still trickling in. And we've got a very nice group of people. I first of all want to thank everybody for being able to join us at the last minute like this. Ordinance just came out Thursday night, and we were scrambling to schedule a meeting for this evening. But I am just really pleased to see everyone here. All righty. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And again, thank you all for coming. I am really appreciative of it. And we need everybody here, and we need everybody's support, because we have a real battle on our hands with this new proposed ordinance. I am once again still surprised by the language that's in this proposed ordinance. And I want to say simply that when you read the language of the ordinance, and Patrick and Marisa are going to put that into the to the chat for us. See that it is primarily designed to serve the interests of law enforcement. And specifically, it is designed to allow SDPD and the Police Officers Association to reach in and control the new commission. And we'll talk more about that in terms of what the specific provisions are. Before we do, I would like to introduce my co-chair, Marisa Martin, and allow her to introduce herself. Marisa.
Hello, everyone. I'm Marisa Talbert. I'm Andrea's co-chair here on San Diegans for Justice. That is me. I will turn it back over. I know we have a lot to talk about.
We do have a lot to talk about, and we don't want to keep people long. Also with us tonight, speaking on about
comfortable. The next step is holding it up to
the provisions of the new ordinance is Patrick Anderson. And Patrick, I will allow you to introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. It's good to see so many of you again. We've been doing this a long time, and I've missed you all, those of you I haven't seen in a while. I'm, in my professional life, a professor at UCSD, but you all know me as a member of the former CRB, who became a member of a commissioner on the interim commission after the chaptering of Measure B. I am in charge of community engagement for the commission. And I've been working closely with Andrea, San Diegans for Justice, with Women Occupy, Mid-City Can, and many other groups to facilitate this part of the process. On the commission, I'm also on the transition committee that has been spending the last year attempting to incorporate all of the community feedback from those roundtables a year ago into what would become the full commission. As part of that, I'll be talking a bit about that work tonight, but we've been tracking every moment of this period. And I've put into the chat not only the second draft of the ordinance, which has highlights for the sections that changed from the first ordinance, but I also put the list of 17 recommendations that the transition committee made and that the full commission endorsed to incorporate all of the community feedback into the implementation ordinance. I think if you came in late, you may not see it. So there's the recommendation list again. And in a moment, or Marisa, maybe you could drop the ordinance again. I don't have it at my hand.
And Patrick, can I just make sure that people are really clear on it? The ordinance that Patrick and Marisa are putting in the chat is the ordinance that the city put out.
That's right.
It is not the voters ordinance that San Diegans for Justice has prepared. It's the proposed ordinance by the city. And also, just to kind of give people direction on what we're going to be doing tonight, Patrick and I will be discussing what are the particular issues that we see in the city ordinance, and also letting people know where we think it is at most at odds with what you all have asked for during these community forums, and why we think it's so at odds with what the community is thinking. And then later on, we'll finish up with a call to action and what we really need to do to make sure that this proposed ordinance does not go forward. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Patrick.
Thank you so much. If I could ask if folks could make sure you're muted, just so we don't have any noise. And also, if you're on the phone, to mute yourself, you should be already muted, but to unmute yourself is *9, and to raise your hand when we get to that section is *6 if you're calling in on the telephone. I'm going to focus on a few things that when I saw the second draft were most, that stood out the most for me as being in conflict with what was most important to the community. And I'm going to be referring to what I put in the chat, which is the, I'll put it in one more time, the annotated recommendations. Hopefully they'll come through, which again were based entirely on community feedback and on a year spent by the transition committee doing pretty hardcore research on every aspect of oversight and policing in San Diego. So the first thing that is most important, in my opinion, is listed on that sheet as recommendation 2. This is the makeup of the commission itself. There are a few things that the community insisted be in there. First of all, 2 dedicated youth seats defined as 18 to 24 years old. I'm very happy to say that that made it in. The commission that this draft ordinance lays out has 25 members, 2 from each council district, the 2 youth seats, and then 5 designated seats that I'll talk about in a moment. This is very different from what we proposed based on your feedback. So we proposed 1 seat designated per council district, so that's 9 seats, 2 designated youth seats, so that's a total of 11. And then the other 14 seats, if you look at the language in that form, in that recommendations PDF, we did an extensive amount of research to figure out how best to include people who had prior bad experiences with law enforcement, or whose family members had had bad experiences, and who lived in districts that faced higher rates, disproportionate rates of stops and searches, uses of force, and other police contacts. We also looked at a variety of boards and commissions across the state to find out how they encouraged and enforced representation by those communities and those neighborhoods and people. And we wrote all of that language into that recommendation, cycled it back through the community, got it approved, and then put it forward for the full commission. This is, in my opinion, the most important thing that we need to have in the ordinance. Related to that, it was extremely important that the community be involved in the nomination and selection process. The current draft does not, it doesn't quite do what we asked for it to do. It does, it sort of says anybody can make a nomination, but it delegates every aspect of the appointment process to City Council itself. You can look at recommendation 3 for how we proposed it. I'm also happy to report that just about 20 minutes ago, we got a legal opinion back that we had requested from our outside counsel, who confirmed the commission's reading of city law about making appointments and allowing the commission and the community to be involved in the nomination process more formally. I'll share that as soon as I'm able to do so. So those are recommendations 2 and 3 on that form. The second and third things on my list are things that we didn't anticipate they would put into this ordinance, and yet here they are. The first one is a felony exclusion. And you'll probably remember from our discussions last year that the community wanted all exclusions based on someone's criminal record out, so that people who had a history could serve on this commission. We stripped all of that from our own bylaws and standard operating procedures. And in the second draft, they included a felony exclusion. We don't believe that should be there. And in fact, current state law, the new state law that restricts the use of criminal records in hiring may actually prevent that. I'm not an attorney, I don't know for sure, but I'm concerned about it. Third, there are references throughout the draft ordinance to POBAR laws, or the Police Officer Bill of Rights. We think that those should not be there, and that they should use general language like all applicable local, state, and federal law, rather than naming specific laws. Because if at any point in the future those laws change, by statute, the commission would still be required to uphold them in its functions. So we want that language stripped out. And then the last thing I'll say, this is related to recommendations number 8 and 9. We had asked that our independent investigators be allowed access to crime scenes and to any other investigatory scenes that the police were creating or pursuing. That does not appear. There's been a suggestion that that could be written into the standard operating procedures for the commission. But the problem is that SDPD is not bound by our standard operating procedures. They are bound by this ordinance. So we think that those investigatory proceedings should be included in the ordinance itself. And then finally, related to this, the ordinance does have stipulations about the data and records that the police have to provide to the commission and to its investigators. We asked that all city records related to a particular complaint or event be made available within a certain deadline to the commission. The current draft ordinance does not include all city records. It only includes records held by PD. So if there's anything outside of what PD holds that's connected to an investigation, the commission would not have access to it. Okay, I'll stop there. Those are my big sort of neon sign concerns about this draft.
So forgive me for just kind of recapping what you just said, Patrick, but I just want everybody to be really clear that in looking at the things that Patrick has talked about in the appointment process and the nomination process, it had just changed it from the focus that the community gave it and changed it to a completely different focus of who is going to get onto the board and how they're going to get on the board. And it has created a situation where people who are the least affected by ones who are more likely to get on the commission. Okay. And that's the exact opposite of what the community had wanted.
And if I could just add to that very briefly, I didn't go back to this, but because the draft ordinance designates all 25 seats, in other words, it defines who's allowed to fill that seat, it makes it virtually impossible to keep the commission fully staffed. It is so difficult to fill designated seats, and they have designated all 25 seats. The last 5 seats that aren't either geographical or youth-based are designated by what's called census tract low income data. And the problem with that designation is that it doesn't map onto, it doesn't match communities that experience higher rates of policing. And so it doesn't actually get us to the representation we want on this commission. Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to fill that in a bit.
And also, let's say the census tract that was designated is not just low income, it's also moderate income. Okay. So, you know, and also the complete, and I want to make it real clear. This ordinance says that anybody who has ever been convicted of a felony cannot be a commissioner. No, if you have ever in your entire life been convicted of a felony, you may not be on this commission. All right. So think of someone that you know who is a wonderful person who would be perfect for the commission. And when, you know, 20 or 30 years ago, they had some kind of a felony conviction for, let's say, drugs or something like that. That person can't be on the commission. That's what they have done with this. Okay. So I wish I could say that that's all that has gone wrong in this ordinance, but there's a whole lot more that has gone wrong. And I would say for me, and again, this is a little bit from my perspective as an attorney, but you know, that's kind of what we do. One of the biggest parts of Measure B was we wanted to give the new commission the ability to do a true of certain actions like police shootings, when in custody deaths, when a police officer kills someone. And we wanted a robust investigation of that. So what does this ordinance do? It guts Measure B because it defines investigation to mean just looking at secondhand sources. So it defines investigation so broadly that instead of doing an investigation as we see it, you know, an investigation of original sources, interviewing people, you know, instead the commission can just review what the police department has done, which essentially means it would still be acting exactly like the old CRB. Okay, so they've gone that far to try to gut Measure B to make the new commission act just like the old CRB. So the definition of investigation has got to come out. It has got to change. The second thing that they've done is, I don't know if it's even more shocking, but it is perhaps the clearest provisions that show that the SDPD is being allowed to reach in and control the commission. Okay. There are a couple of provisions in the ordinance that say that essentially that the Police Officers Association can get together with the city and decide what the operating procedures should be for the new commission. That provision allows SDPD just to reach in and decide what the procedures for the new commission are going to be. That is unconscionable. And this negotiation is private because it's called collective bargaining, right? So they can go behind closed doors and decide what the commission's procedures are going to be. The Police Officers Association can do this, okay? That is reprehensible. That has got to come out. But it shows you the length to which SDPD will go to try to stay in control, and how much the city is allowing SDPD to stay in control. Someone in the city, and I don't know who, said it was okay to put this in this new provision. All right.
Andrea, really quickly, there's
Yeah.
a question in the chat. Do you have the draft in front of you? Can you point us to the section?
I do have the draft in front of me, and what I would ask is if you did a search of the term collective bargaining, it appears twice. It appears at least twice in the ordinance. So just do a Google search for collective. And yes, and who could it be? Who could have done that? We have someone who had a suggestion. And it may not be just one person. It obviously, I don't know how many hands this went through, but everybody said it was okay for SDPD to be able to control the commission like this. So I just want that to be really clear. And this one, again, there are so many things in here that are just shocking to me. In this ordinance, the police department, or excuse me, the commission is required to give the police department a copy of all the complaints the commission receives within 5 days of receiving them. There is nowhere in this ordinance that requires SDPD to give any of the complaints they receive to the commission. Nowhere. They are not required to give their complaints to the I mean, that's just shocking to me, you know. And again, let's be really clear. This was not, they didn't just forget it. San Diegans for Justice was very clear that that had to be placed in the ordinance. Very clear. Yet, again, someone at the city decided not to put that in. Okay. And you'll see, you know, in several points in the ordinance, they require the commission to base what they do on data, right? And understanding what the data is. How can the commission do that if SDPD isn't even required to give them the data, such as the complaints that they're receiving, right? And it just shows how law enforcement has worked, again, to try to undercut the new commission. Yeah. And another thing that is really shocking, which came out of the blue, because this I don't believe was their first draft. SDPD put in or asked, you know, in some way, got some way to put the city attorney or to put into this ordinance a definition of personnel records. And it's really broad, okay? It's much broader than what we would consider personnel records. It then later on goes on to say that every part of the commission's investigation or review is considered a personnel record, including complaints made and filed are considered personnel records, which would mean that they are all confidential. So essentially, they have defined personnel records in such a way and then specifically directed the commission to treat everything it does as a personnel record, so that every single thing that the commission does is a secret and can't be released to the public. That is the exact opposite of the transparency that Measure B brought forth, okay? So I could go on for a very long time about all the things that are wrong with this ordinance. But what we really want to do is we want to hear from everyone here. As I said, Patrick and I were trying to point out the things that we thought were most at odds with what the community wanted. Because as I hope everyone will remember, Marisa and I drafted a voters ordinance that really compiled everything that the community wanted and everything that we knew from our work and talking to people, and we presented that to the city. And that was largely ignored, right? Let's be really clear. It was largely ignored. They did very little with what we had presented them. I guess they may have been a little too busy putting in all of the provisions that the SDPD wanted. that they didn't have time to think about putting in the provisions that, you know, the community wanted. But what we want to hear from is you, and what your thoughts are on what Patrick and I have pointed out as things we're particularly concerned about. And also if there are any other things that you're concerned about. Because what we're going to do is we are going to compile a very short list of talking points. As I hope you all know, there is a PSLN meeting on this proposed ordinance Friday, January 21st at 2 p.m. in front of PSLN. And of course, we want every single person on this call, if you can, every person that you know, to turn out for PSLN and let them know that, you know, we did not come this far just so that SDPD could once again do everything it can to try to control the commission. That is not what we did this for. That's not what we were looking for, you know. And we are also going to, we'll send out those talking points once we've finished compiling them. Also, San Diegans for Justice is going to create an email for people to be able to send to all the members of PSLN. Hopefully, we will have that out by tomorrow. We'll be asking everybody on this call, everybody connected with San Diegans for Justice, to use the method that we send them, or even if your own method, to send all of the members on PSLN and tell them, do not send this ordinance to the full city council. You need to go back and you need to add in the provisions that the community has demanded. And we will not stand for anything less. So I want everybody to look for the emails tomorrow, look for the talking points, and once you get them, please ask 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 friends of yours to please spend 30 seconds to send that email to PSLN. And if they have time, show up and give comment on Friday at 2 p.m. Because we cannot let this move forward. We just can't. So we're gonna open it up so that everybody can give comment. I see that Roberta has her hand up. So, and actually I am going to let Patrick, I'll let Roberta get started, and Patrick, I will turn it over to you for you to take questions.
Okay, I'll facilitate. I think Francine's hand was up first, but I do want to say just very quickly, what I'm doing as a guest here tonight is to take this discussion, to take everything you all say, taking it back to a special meeting of the Transition Committee Thursday morning for us to endorse recommendations. And then we will take that to a special meeting of the full commission later that day. And then after that, Thursday night, Women Occupy and Mid-City Can are holding a forum, and I will report back to the community about what happened in those 2 meetings. Again, if you're on the phone, you can raise your hand by typing *6, I believe it is. Francine, you had your hand up, or did you take it down? Francine, are you there?
You're on mute, Francine.
I'm going to come back to Francine in just a minute. So Roberta, let's start with you.
Okay, thank you so much for the time. So much of what, I mean, all of what you said is impactful, but for me personally, and I know it's because of what I do for a living, the proposed ordinances dealing with what an investigation is. Oh my gosh. So I mean, that is the heart and soul of what the commission's intended to do. And if you can't do it independently of the police department or any other governmental agency, it's impossible for the commission to do the work they need to do. I'm part of investigations of criminal activity and bad behavior every day. And you have to be able to be creative. You have to be able to think outside the box. You need to be able to get documents yourself and not worry if they've been altered or redacted, or haven't gotten all of them. Maybe you've gotten most of them, but that one page is missing. I mean, there's just so many things wrong with someone providing you information versus you going to get it yourself. There's just a whole level of credibility that comes with the power to access information on your own. And so of all of and they're all, I mean, none of it's great, but that point was the one that concerns me the most.
Okay, I've got that on my list. I agree with you. I think it connects a couple of the things that Andrea was talking about in terms of the definition, and also in terms of the records and crime scene access that I had raised earlier. So I'm going to highlight that. I think you're absolutely right. If there's not independent, creative investigation available to the commission, it cannot fulfill its mandate. Thank you for that. Yasmin.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Andrea and Patrick, for going over the concerns. One question that I had, Andrea, you mentioned that they have defined personnel in such a broad way that everything the commission will be doing will be considered secret. What would an alternative language to that be that we possibly can push for, alternative to what they have?
That, thank goodness, is a really easy question. Personnel records are already defined in state statutes. Okay. All you need to do is take out the definition of personnel records. You don't need to have it in this ordinance. It's already defined and regulated by statute, including POBOR. Okay. And the same way, because they have it twice, and then they have another provision where it says that all personnel records, or excuse me, all of the investigation is considered a personnel record. That you just take it out. Okay, so it's really a simple fix. Take out the definition of personnel record and take out the requirement that everything in an investigation be considered a personnel record. Just take it out.
I'll just echo that by saying in one of our earliest roundtables, Tasha Williamson had the best phrase that has stuck with me ever since then. Everything that can be made public must be made public. That's the good sort of golden rule for a commission like this. And the definition of records as personnel records starts to chip away at it, as Andrea was outlining. Does that,
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, and that is as a very good answer also to Yasmin's question. Take out personnel records and put in there saying even more explicitly, everything that can be made public must be made public, period. Everything that can be made public must be made public.
Yeah. Ms. Francine, I'm going to try to click the ask to unmute again. Hopefully this will help. Did that work? If you're on a phone, you might try *9, but I'm not sure if you're on a phone or not. Ms. Francine, if you want to type your question into the chat, I'm happy to read it. Something's wrong. Okay. Other reactions or things that we haven't talked about that did stand out to others, or questions or clarifications that others have? I'm going to scroll back. There was a question about collective bargaining, and I just want to clarify or make sure I understand. There were a couple questions about collective bargaining. So Andrea, your point is that there should be no reference to anything being subject to collective bargaining, right?
No,
that's irrelevant to the proceedings.
No, it's worse than irrelevant. It's worse than irrelevant. And I don't want to get too wonky about how laws work and what takes precedence over what. Um, um, but suffice it to say that by inserting collective bargaining in this ordinance, in the way that it has been inserted, it essentially allows SDPD to change and to change the procedures for the commission in a collective bargaining environment. And that's a closed door session between the police and the city.
Yeah.
And come and decide how and decide how the commission is going to work. That is astounding.
Yeah. And it brings the police union into those discussions as the central player as well.
Yeah. They get to essentially decide how the commission works.
Yeah.
And I don't know why I'm so stunned by that, because that has been really from the beginning. I mean, you've got to remember the CRB was created by the Police Officers Association. They have always sought to have control over an entity that's supposed to be overseeing them.
Mhm.
And so they're very used to being able to have control over entities like this. But that's the whole point of Measure B, no longer, right?
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that clarification. Yvonne, I think you have your hand up.
Yes, and I could unmute, by the way. So a couple things. After I read everything, I went out to kind of on the PSLN homepage to kind of understand how we're going to be able to speak at the meeting. The link to that, the instructions for public speaking during the meeting is broken. You can't get to it. So something needs to be fixed before Friday so that people can call in.
I've made a note. I saw your thing in the chat, and I'm going to
Right.
follow up in the way that I can, but I think
Right.
others should do the same. That's a really big
Well, and
deal.
I actually already have talked to a council member about that that's on the committee.
Okay.
And then, I mean, probably the thing that appalled me the most was the whole felony thing. I mean, I just couldn't believe after all the years we've put into getting felons their rights back after they've, served their sentence and paid their debt to society, that in this ordinance, we're gonna like that. That's awful. That's horrible. I think it's illegal. I can't believe it. And then I guess the other thing that, and it kind of goes along with the investigatory powers. So am I hearing you say that you want no stipulation as to how an investigation works? Because I thought we had been very clear in the people's ordinance with the whole detail of things.
No, in fact, what we do want a definition of investigation. And also just to give you a background, last spring or maybe early last summer, I was approached by the CPP Transition Committee, and they asked if I would draft a definition of investigation for them. And I said, I absolutely will. So I drafted a definition. I brought it before the Transition Committee. We all talked about it. The Transition Committee loved it. We maybe changed a couple of words, but we were all in agreement that this is the appropriate definition of investigation. And what made that definition appropriate was it required them to systematically and formally gather information from original sources. Okay, and that's the real term. You've got to get that in. You've got to go out and interview your own the witnesses yourself. You've got to go out and look at the scene of the incident yourself. You can't just do gather secondary sources like just get information from AI, which is what CRB did. Okay, so what we want is the definition that the CPP and San Diegans for Justice came up with, based on, and let's be really clear, the expectation of the community. When you think of an investigation, you don't think of somebody just reading somebody else's report and making a decision based on it. You think of an investigation of somebody going out there, digging, talking to people, talking to original sources. That's what people think of as an investigation. And so we put in the definition.
And
Right.
I'll just add that the transition committee took that recommendation from the community and then did research on it. We went and spoke to people who have been investigators for oversight boards for 30 years. We brought them to our meetings. We poured through investigation manuals to figure out how these things actually work. You know, and there are 3 of us on the commission who are actually credentialed now by the National Association of Civilian Oversight for Law Enforcement as practitioners of oversight. So we pulled every resource we could find into framing the community recommendation in a way that matches the best practices of the field. And it doesn't appear in this draft. Yvonne, does that help?
Well,
this
yes,
out
and
even
I
more?
guess that's a long, that they're not going to give us that long to speak at the PSLN meeting. So I guess, and I'm really good at writing to all the city council people that I need to at times. So I hope you give us something around that we can send out as our message.
So I'm the collector of conversation and feedback, and Andrea and San Diegans for Justice will be providing that language for you. Yeah.
So yeah, what we're going to do is, again, we wanted to talk to everybody, get everybody's thoughts on this. And I've been talking to individuals, people have been calling me, I've been talking to a lot of people. And so we are definitely going to do several things. One is San Diegans for Justice is going to create an email that everyone can automatically send to the members of PSLN. So we'll create that, let you know when that's ready, and you can, it won't take you more than a minute to send emails to everybody. We want to make it as easy as possible for you. Now, of course, you can send your own emails too. We don't want to stop you at all from doing that. But we know it takes more time and it's a little more difficult. We will also send out talking points or suggested talking points for PSLN. And those talking points will be based on the concerns that I've been hearing from the community, the concerns that we are hearing right here. So we'll have those talking points, and we'll also send out a link to the PSLN on January 21 to make it easier for you to get there. So
I do see a couple other folks. I want to make sure we get them in. Let's see, we've got Darwin and then Tren. So Darwin, you're up.
All right, thank you. Thank you for calling this meeting. Darwin Fishman with the Racial Justice Coalition of San Diego and North County Equity and Justice Coalition. I want to just ask, I didn't see it in the chat, but I did want to ask specifically about the new members of the Public Safety and Livable Neighborhood Committee and what the discussions have been like with them behind the scenes. Are they in support of these changes? Are there ones that we need to specifically spend, attention on, focus on? What's your sense of the vote count?
So I will just say that in about 3 or 4 months ago, we encouraged District 4 to send the chief of staff to our transition committee meetings, and he and one other person have been attending regularly. And we have been sharing everything with them, making sure that everything we produce, all the data we collect, all the research we do goes directly to the members of that committee. Andrea, do you want to say more about this?
I do. I really, really do. So let's talk about the new composition of PSLN. Okay. Monica Montgomery Stepp is still the president of or the chair of PSLN. Councilmember Vivian Moreno is now back on PSLN. So she's a second member. We also have Councilmember Monty Von Wilpert on PSLN, and we also have Councilmember Raul Campillo. Let's be clear. Let's be really clear on this. SDPD has been able to insert itself entirely in this ordinance. These 4 council members are under incredible pressure by law enforcement to make sure that SDPD can remain in control of the commission. All right. We have to help all 4 of these members of PSLN by giving them the support that they need to say, no, we're not going to do that. And that's going to be hard, because I'm going to tell you, on Friday, Monica is going to get up and she's going to say, this is a really strong ordinance. We should move this on to city council. I got to tell you, I don't think it's because she really wants it. And I don't have any inside knowledge. I just know Monica. I can't imagine that Monica wants to put in a definition of investigation that guts Measure B, and she wants to bar all people with felony. I'll just never believe that that's what she wants. But she's going to have to get up and say it because of all the pressure that SDPD has put on her and her need to get other votes. So we need to make sure that all 4 of these PSLN members know that, no, we're going to stand up and we're going to scream about this, and this is not going to get through. It's just not. So we need to make sure that all 4 of PSLN members know this. And so we need everybody to write all 4 members of PSLN. If your city council member is not on PSLN, write your city council member too. Write Todd Gloria, write the mayor. The mayor should be stepping up and saying, he screamed during his campaign that he was in support of Measure B. He needs to keep supporting it right now, right? Did that answer your question fully, Darwin?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Darwin.
Yeah.
Trin, you're up next, and then Roberta.
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Trin. I'm with Mid-City Can. Thank you, SDJ, for hosting this meeting. I think Andrea has already answered it, but my question is around Councilmember Monica Montgomery Stepp. If anyone has had conversations with her about what she's willing to change in the ordinance, I just find it really hard to understand. Monica's known as the people's council member, so why would she go against the will of the people? And it sounds like, Andrea, you're saying that the police unit has a lot of influence over her, which, hasn't been the case before, but if that's true, I'd like to hear more about that so we can understand how to overcome that, right? So if folks have any knowledge around that, that would be really helpful.
Yeah.
I'll just very quickly say that one of the things I know and am absolutely convinced of is that Council Vice President Pro Tem, I hope I'm getting the title right, Montgomery Stepp is aligned with us on the question of wanting to ensure that there's representation on the commission of people who have adverse experiences with the police in their history. I know that. And I know that her office, her chief of staff, and also Tiffany Harrison have confirmed that and have listened to the recommendations that we've put forward. So that at the beginning of tonight, when I was walking through the things standing out to me, especially recommendation number 2 on that recommendation list, and I'll just put it in the chat one last time, is one that my expectation is that they would be very open to that, because that is one of their goals. Beyond that, I haven't had one-on-one conversations with any of them. So Andrea, if you want to step in.
Yeah, and so I want to be really, really clear about that though, Patrick. When you're talking to the D4 office in Monica's office, they express agreement, but that's not what showed up in the ordinance. Okay. And that's the problem. And that's part of the problem, because we all know and love Monica. Okay. But what this ordinance is completely undermines Measure B. All right. And so we have to separate out what we know is probably in Monica's heart from what is in this ordinance. That is simply how powerful SDPD is. Right. And Monica's office is, they have to get something through. And if they're not finding that they have support from those other 3 members on PSLN, if they don't have support from other council members, she's in a really tough place. And so what we need to do is make sure that we ensure that all of the city council members know what the community wants and that we're not going to stand for what's going on, so that Monica has the support she needs to be able to negotiate harder and stronger.
I have no comment on that, except here I am nodding. Thank you, Trin. Roberta.
I'm going to ask a delicate question now that I turned my mute button off. From what I just heard, and I was listening to everyone's words very closely, it sounds to me like this most recent draft of the ordinance was not drafted by the entirety of the PSLN committee, but rather perhaps its chair. Am I correct?
My understanding is, well, I would say this. I would say that this ordinance has been bigger than any state secret that I've ever been aware of.
Right.
It is, you know, I know that when I look at this ordinance, it appears that SDPD had a seat at the table, or some representative of SDPD or the POA or someone was part of drafting this. I mean, their fingerprints are all over it. I know that SDJ did not have that kind of access. I know that the CPP did not have that kind of access. And I don't know if anybody else had that kind of access.
But my point is, I don't even think the other PSLN members had access. I'm not, I don't, it doesn't,
Yeah.
It doesn't, because I asked questions of my own council member about this. This has been an interest of mine since Measure B was first discussed, even before the election.
Yeah.
And she was unable to offer me any substantive information because it wasn't provided.
Yeah.
So I'm just, my concern is, yeah, the entire committee needs to understand what the community expects again and again and again. But I want to caution people about the message they send to the PSLN members, because not all of the members, I believe, have had control over the product that we have in front of us.
No. I would say that when you have something that is so secret, it's easy to, it's like finger pointing and you don't know who did what and what came out. I will say this. Clearly the product, I will say this, if who's ever in charge of this ordinance thought that they could make it more in keeping with Measure B and have all of the members vote for it, then I think they would do it, right? All the council members. So it gets a little fuzzy as to what council members are willing to actually vote for. But I will say this, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, and that eating is going to take place on Friday. And nobody can hide behind anything. We want to see what your vote is. And that the vote is going to be not to pass it along. And that vote is going to be to redraft it with the recommendations that people give at PSLN. So we'll see who's really for us or against us when we see a vote. So yeah, but I hear what you're saying, Roberta. I definitely hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
And I mean, for my part, you know, for those who don't know how this process works and all of its intricacy, the next step is that we go into what's called meet and confer. And meet and confer is that whatever has been passed along is put into deliberation with POA and with PD. And what we come out of the other side with of the meet and confer process is not more of what the community wanted, but less. I mean, that process leads to the whittling away of all that the community has been asking for. And so it seems to me that if you want an ordinance that really lives up to Measure B, you want to go into that process with as much as possible that the community has asked for. Because again, you know that after that process, you're not going to end up with more than you asked for. You're going to end up with less. What I'm hearing from folks, because we're talking about different aspects of this process, I'm gathering that folks are in agreement with what Andrea and I have highlighted as being the sort of key areas of concern so far. Is there anything more that folks wanted to pull out or make sure that we were also raising? Or does it seem like this list of, I've got 6 total items from the list so far. I'm happy to summarize them, but I don't want to take up discussion time doing that if folks have other things they want to make sure I include on the list. Would you like me to summarize them again? Are there other questions?
Can you summarize them, please?
Absolutely. So the 4 issues, or the issues that I raised, were, first of all, on that recommendation form. I'll put it in the chat one more time just to be sure. This is what the transition committee had put forward based on community feedback and our own research over the last year. Recommendation 2, that the makeup of the committee needs to revert to the language that we had proposed, ensuring, first of all, that only 11 of the 25 seats are delegated, which allows us to fill the commission. Otherwise, we won't have a full commission. And that incorporates priorities so that subject matter experts, so people who work with mental health and so on and so forth, are prioritized, in addition to people who have real experience with adverse interactions with the police. Also, recommendation 3, that there be a formal way for community members and the commission to participate in the nomination and selection process. The felony exclusion has got to go. The language referencing any specific legislation, including POBAR laws and so on, needs to go and replaced with just a simple phrase: all relevant local, state, and federal law. And then we had major concerns about the investigation process. Investigators need to have access to crime scenes, and they also need to have access to all city records relevant to a case, not just PD records. Andrea noted that the current draft defines all investigation materials as personnel records, which then makes them subject to POBAR laws, which means they're even more sort of private and secret and confidential than other investigation records. And finally, that in 3 different sections on page 14, 20, and 25, this draft subjects investigations and proceedings of the commission to collective bargaining restrictions with the police department and the police union, the POA. So those are the 6 or 7 things that we've drawn out, some of which are sort of part of the others. Does that seem, Roberta, is your hand up again, or is that just a floater hand from before?
It's floating. Sorry.
Okay, that's all right. Yasmin, your hand is up.
Yes, I have a really quick question regarding the number of the seats on the commission.
Yeah.
All 3 drafts have chosen the number 25. Is there a specific reason for that number? Do we think that's a good number, or has it been difficult to appoint people to these positions, like to find 25 members?
It's a great question. I can't remember exact, it's now been about 9 months since we settled on that exact number, but it's, for us, the question is more about flexibility with the appointments rather than the number itself. What 25, I think, was based on 23, which was the former CRB plus the 2 youth seats, and that got us to 25. I think that's how we landed on 25. The nice thing about that number, if you have only 1 designated seat for each district, plus the 2 youth seats, then that leaves you a nice number of seats to be able to bring in subject matter experts, people who work with unsheltered people, people with experience in mental health, addiction treatment, and so on, to serve on the commission, in addition to ensuring representation by those parts of the city that experience over policing that we can show with data, and so on. So that's where that number came from. The problem with the current draft, first of all, is that it doesn't include any of those priorities that I was just talking about. And secondly, that it designates every single one of the 25 seats. So if there are vacancies, the commission and the city council must fill that seat with someone from the same designated area. There's no flexibility built in. And that makes it impossible. I mean, I've been on the CRB/commission for 4 years. We've never been fully staffed. There's always been at least a vacancy or 3. There are currently, I don't even know, 10 vacancies, 11 vacancies. So if you designate every seat, it makes it impossible to fill the commission. Does that answer your question, Yasmin?
And can I add
Yes, thank you.
Can I add just a little more to that? One, there are vacancies right now because the commission says that it doesn't, is taking the position, or excuse me, the council is taking the position that it doesn't have the ability to fill vacancies until the ordinance is passed. But to answer your question, yes, the CRB did sometimes have difficulty filling their positions. But the problem was that a lot of people, particularly people that you really wanted to see on the old CRB, they thought it would be a waste of their time because they didn't feel that it was really doing the work and couldn't do the investigative work that really needed to be done. I cannot tell you, I have a list so long of people calling me saying, I want to be on this new commission. People are dying to be on this new commission, because they see it as a commission that's going to do worthwhile work. You're not going to have a problem if getting people on the commission now, as long as you don't have it too geographically based, like the ordinance is proposed. There are a lot of people who want to be on this commission. You just have to free up the language of the ordinance so that those people can actually be appointed.
And I'll just say, we drafted that language, taking community recommendations and doing a year's worth of research on data, on what other boards and commissions do. And we circled it back through the commission, and the District 4 reps were in the room when we did all of that work. I was actually shocked to see that it wasn't. I was fully expecting it to be in the second draft. Okay, we have Trin and then Darwin.
Yes, thank you. I just want to follow up on that question, actually, because I've done a bit of boards and commissions work. 25 is a fairly large number, I think, for commissioners. Like, I think the new HRC at the county is around 25 as well. And I hear there's issues with getting stuff done because of the different personalities and the large amount of people on it. So I just want to flag that. And also that means the quorum is higher as well, right? So if you don't have quorum, then you can't do business, you can't meet. So that's also something to take into consideration.
A part of the size is because of the workload. I'm barred from talking about any specifics about cases. I can say that I have spent the biggest case that I was in charge of reviewing, I spent over 100 hours on. That's unsustainable for working people. And that was one case. Now, granted, that's an extreme example, but there are so many cases that, you know, these are volunteer positions, and we want people on this commission who are working people, who are parents or caregivers. We want people to be on this commission. And so you're absolutely right, Trin, about quorum and being able to get work done. I'm also thinking about the labor of doing the case review and the investigations. And we do need to have a staff of commissioners who can do that work thoughtfully and devote the time that it needs and not be overwhelmed by the amount of work. Darwin, your hand is next.
Thank you. Let me just offer some my personal experience of being on the CRB to support what Patrick and Andrea have said. So when I was on there, and I lasted about 2 years, I mean, first I was removed by the mayor. So I mean, again, all this my experience leads to exactly why we did Measure B and why I support this and why we need to do it right. My incoming class of folks, my colleagues I was trained with, was 6 people. We were all 6 men. It was 5 other white men. When I got on there, the first thing I noticed in the room for the CRB is I was the only black man in the room. The other part of this too, goes with the life experience, I was also the only person that had a criminal record. And that was part of the background check that came up. And it's just for me a misdemeanor. So there's not that diversity. So when I got into discussions with other folks, I literally had a discussion with, one of my first discussions with a CRB member was about police. And he was open, he said, police officers lie. Well, I said, when I was arrested, a police officer lied to me saying I don't get a phone call. And I just want to really hammer that point home about the significance of life experience that folks have and that's not been on the CRB. And that's part of why we're doing what we're doing to change that around. And not surprisingly, I was quite often the minority vote. 3 or 4 of us would vote against basically rubber stamping the IA. So that's really important. The other thing I want to say about the incoming class that I was a part of, the other 5 people, I also noticed all of them were north of the 8 where they live, and they were open about it. Most of them were judges, retired judge, lawyers, and that's obviously not representative of all of San Diego or what we want on here. So I say that because it is going to be a lot of work to change around. Andrea's right. A lot of it is the confidence and the trust. Why even bother if you know this is the makeup? And it's basically fixed. 99% of the time they vote along the lines of IA, and we're just reviewing what IA will give us. We meet on the 7th floor of the police department. The police department would have to buzz you in. IA had the lock, the key for our records to be able to access the files. We'd basically have to get permission. That's the way it would work with the CRB. So I just want to make sure folks know that in terms of some of the background and why, again, folks like me, Andrea, Patrick, and others are highly motivated to do this and what's at stake with this. So thank you.
Thank you.
That helps.
Thank you for that, Darwin. I think that the context of how the CRB operated is really important. And, you know, I can report that the CPP has its own offices that are nowhere near the police department. It will keep its own records. We've been meeting on Zoom for the last 2 years, so we have not had to be buzzed in and go up to the 7th floor of headquarters. And the records have been finally were made available remotely so that we could do case review without having, I mean, aside from what Darwin was describing of being in the police, you know, being in central headquarters and in internal affairs, it was also true that people were forced to get themselves there, and, you know, no transportation was provided and so on. So remote access has been, frankly, a godsend to doing this work. And thankfully, all of that stuff in Measure B about separating the commission from the police department, separating the records, separate offices, I'm happy to say that all of that is in place. All of that is, you know, I don't have the most recent updates on space, but they've looked at spaces. I believe they've identified the space where it will be, where the offices will be, and so on. It's a really helpful reminder, Darwin. The stakes are very high. And I just want to direct people back on that recommendation sheet to recommendation number 2. All of that language about who should be on this commission and what the priorities are. You all should be proud of that. That came from the roundtables, and it came from all of these sessions that we've done to solicit community feedback. And it's the language that's there is backed by all of the work we did to go out and figure out what the data show, and again, what other boards and commissions in California have been able to do. It seems like, Andrea, before we transition to the last part of this meeting, I just want to give folks one more chance. I am reading the chat and all of that. Is there anything else that jumps out at folks that they want to make sure is on our list? Trin.
Hi, sorry, I don't have an answer to your question. I have a question because I'm looking at the list right now, and there's 17 recommendations, the changes, correct?
Those are the 17 that the transition committee and the full commission approved, that were based on all the community feedback. But
Okay.
some of what Andre and I have talked about are not on that list because we didn't expect them to be in the second draft. So like the felony exclusion, for example, is
Okay.
not on that list because we didn't think it was going to be in this draft.
Got it. So there seems to be a lot of things wrong with this ordinance. And I'm just wondering, what are the changes that need to be made in order for us to support this ordinance? Does all 17 changes or X amount of changes need to be made, or is there like a top 3 that we really want to push for to prioritize? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And those are the talking points we're going to be putting together and sending out. And Patrick kind of gave a list. There's probably about a top 6 to 8. But again, we wanted to get everybody's feedback here today before we really finalized and what those talking points were going to be and what those top amendments were going to be. So we're going to send that out. And of course, Trin, I'll be speaking with you and Yasmin later on in the week. I had a conversation with Yasmin earlier today, and really getting that list together. But we wanted input, from everyone here tonight before
Trin,
we really did that.
You've given us a gift with your comment because you've provided the perfect transition for each of us to talk about next steps. So thank you for that. You're always on point. So again, I'm a guest here tonight. I'm representing the transition committee of the CPP. What I am doing with all of this information is I'm going to take these 6 or 7 things, put them in the sort of list of community recommendations. We've called a special meeting of the transition committee for Thursday morning. So I'm taking this list to them, and I'm on that committee. The transition committee will then endorse and put forward recommendations to the full commission. The full commission has called a special meeting for Thursday afternoon. So we'll vote on them there. And then I will also be a guest at the event that Mid-City Can and Women Occupy are hosting Thursday evening, where I will report back what happened at those 2 meetings. So that's what I'm doing. And Andrea, you can talk about what San Diegans for Justice will be doing after tonight.
So we are going to draft talking points for the Friday PSLM, and we will send those talking points out to everybody. And of course, you can make whatever points you want at PSLN, whatever moves you most, but we just want to make sure that we have a list that you can refer to if you would like to, okay? And these are going to be the things that we really need. That through this discussion, everybody feels these are the things that really just gut measure B. We're also going to send you a link where you can go and get an email that's already pre-prepared to send to all the members of PSLN. And, urging them to, one, not send this ordinance to the full city council because it's not ready yet. And also urging them to amend the proposed ordinance that they've made with this list of talking points. And also, just to let you know, I'm going to be sending a longer letter to PSLN, Marisa and I, as San Diegans for Justice, giving a more detailed explanation of everything not everything, but the main things we think are wrong with this ordinance. So just know that PSLN will have a rather detailed synopsis of what needs to be changed. So the talking points that you give them in an email or at the PSLN meeting will just remind them of what San Diegans for Justice has let them know that we as a community have decided that really needs to be changed before things move forward. Does that kind of something, I think that hopefully that will answer everybody's questions about what our next steps moving forward are. I also want to let people know that Women Occupy and Mid-City Can will be having a meeting on Thursday, kind of getting everybody revved up for Friday. If there's anything else, Patrick is going to be also co-hosting that meeting to kind of just solidify things. If you know people who weren't able to make it to this meeting, they may want to go to the Thursday meeting. When San Diegans for Justice sends out our information though, and sends out information for emailing PSLN, we ask everybody to send it out to 1, 2, or 3 more people, and kind of do a chain thing where you're asking more people to send it out, because we need overwhelming force at PSLN if we're going to stop this thing from moving forward.
Yasmin, is your hand up, or is that an old hand?
Quickly, if PSLN do make the 6 to 8 changes we are demanding, are we okay moving forward this Friday if they make those amendments during the meeting?
Andrea, you're on mute.
See, this is the problem. It's about language, right? You can't orally say, oh, we'll make this change, this change, this change. Because you got to see it written. It's too easy to play a game with language. You've got to see the written ordinance itself. And let's also be clear about this. PSLN can set a meeting at the drop of the hat, right? They did it this time. On Thursday, they just said, oh, we're going to meet on Friday. Also, another thing why we wouldn't want to move it forward, because we've thought about this, it would in some ways be counterproductive. If there are a lot of changes to be made, they're really not going to make it at the full council. If you said if they decided to move it forward with all of these recommendations, it would probably just get sent back to PSLN to actually make the changes. So let's have PSLN make all of these changes, bring it forward again to us, and have us look at it again to make sure that it's okay. I don't see any benefit at all in moving it forward to the city council. And because I think it's just too dangerous. The changes may not be made, they may not be made correctly. There will be the sense that this ordinance is worthy of being moved forward when it is not. And for that reason, I think it's very dangerous to move this proposed ordinance forward. We need to see the language before it gets moved forward.
And with that, I think I have what I need to take these recommendations back to the transition committee. So thank you so much to all of you for being here. Thank you to San Diegans for Justice for inviting me. Andrea, last words?
I thank everybody, and please get revved up. Please send those emails to PSLN, and please have everybody send them. And I want to see as many people as possible at January 21st, 2 p.m. And bring your friends with you.
I also want to thank Marisa, who's been doing all this invisible labor behind the scenes tonight. Marisa, we see you. You've had a long day, a long week. Thank you so much for doing that background labor.
So with that, we will sign off. Thank you all, and I hope to see you on Friday.